boa tarde. É com muita satisfação que eu abro esta mesa. Governança do conhecimento, alternativas institucionais emergentes. Realmente, como conclusão desse seminário, nós teremos hoje um tema que é um desafio, né? Várias questões nas mesas anteriores foram colocadas nesta direção, e esta mesa certamente será a oportunidade que nós teremos de trazer novamente as questões colocadas à baila, refletir sobre os papers apresentados aqui e tentar, pelo menos, identificar alguns caminhos, de fazer algumas indicações, dada a complexidade desse tema, que não permite conclusões muito rígidas, né, com relação à governança global. Nós vamos, então, iniciar com a apresentação de Luiz Palombi, que o paper se chama The Search for Alternatives to Patent in the 21st Century, e o Luiz é da Universidade Nacional da Austrália. Sim. Eu vou me apresentar. Eu peço desculpas, meu nome é Cristina Postas, eu sou pesquisadora da Fundação Oswaldo Cruz e atualmente no Ministério da Saúde, chefio a unidade de pesquisa e desenvolvimento tecnológico do Programa Nacional de DST-AIG, onde essa questão da propriedade intelectual dos medicamentos antirretrovirais fez com que eu me envolvesse cada vez mais com esse tema. Eu apresento o Luiz Palombi, vou pedir a ele que se apresente também, né, que é da Universidade Nacional da Austrália.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm very pleased to be here in Rio, and thank you, Ana Celia, for inviting me. Thank you very much. Now, the paper I'm presenting today is a misrepresentation. It is a misrepresentation because the title suggests that there is an alternative to patents. But my conclusion after some considerable amount of research, is that we have come to a point in time in the history of the world where we must give serious consideration to the possibility that there be no patents. And it is controversial. The alternative of no patents is something which is frightening to the neocons of this world. We have now lived for 136 years with an experiment, and this experiment has failed. In 1873, when Europe was actually in the process of dismantling patent systems, the problems that were raised and given as reasons for the demise of patent systems were low patent quality, expensive patent litigation, inefficient patent litigation, lengthy patent pendency, and questionable patentable subject matter. Now, for those of you who are following debates in the United States, in Europe, and probably everywhere else where a patent system exists, you will see that they are reoccurring themes. Now, they have been reoccurring throughout this 136-year period. And the question which I ask is, well, does this mean that we just haven't been able to find adequate solutions to these problems? Or is it because the patent system is fundamentally flawed? The view that I come to is the latter, that it is fundamentally flawed. All attempts to ameliorate the problems that we've just quickly gone through have failed. For the past 5 years, the US Congress has been debating a raft of reforms or suggested reforms to the US patent system. And perhaps this is all, I find this amusing, but probably it isn't really. But, you know, of all countries in the world that insist that strong patent laws are an essential element of every sophisticated developed country, and that every country should follow the American example, indeed, it is America that is out of step with the rest of the world. And the perfect example of that is first to file, first to invent. The US insists on first to invent. In fact, one of the reforms in the current legislation that is before Congress is, my God, a change to the first to file. Now, that is just one example. But despite the fact that we've got this problem with the patent system, we know that it is expensive. It isn't actually an efficient system. We know that most patent offices around the world are struggling to cope with the numbers of patent applications that are coming through. They're struggling with the technologies that are coming through, and they're struggling with this propensity on the part of patent owners, and particularly, I suppose, their advisors, to continue to always stretch the envelope in terms of patentable subject matter. Consequently, we now have controversial issues about gene patents, business methods, computer software. In the future, who knows, it'll be something else. But for 400 years under the Anglo-Saxon or the Anglo-American systems, there has been this rule that patents are about inventions. But somehow that rule seems to be wavering. Attempts to modify some of the worst impacts of patents have been tried and tried thoroughly. Compulsory licensing, for instance, has been tried in the United Kingdom. It was started in 1883. It really didn't work. And if you want details of why it didn't work, you must read my paper, because I'm not going to labour through the paper this afternoon. It's way too hot. But the compulsory licensing system in England just failed, and it failed miserably. And the final test of that failure, I suppose the final proof of that failure, came in 1948, when England adopted the National Health System. And the National Health System was England's introduction to the welfare state, the utopia that was going to bring free health care to the citizens of England. Well, it wasn't a utopia that lasted for very long. But the reason why it was considered to be a utopia, or that it might have been a utopia, was that patent laws were going to somehow modify the behaviour of pharmaceutical companies, in particular in terms of pricing of prescribed medicines. Well, within 10 years of that system being introduced and a new patent law being introduced in 1949, there had been 2 inquiries into the cost of the healthcare system, and by 1959 the budget had blown out to £70 million. That's in 1959 values. By 1965, the British government was exasperated. It didn't have a solution. It appointed another inquiry to examine how it was going to deal with it. The pharmaceutical lobby argued before that inquiry that compulsory licensing should be removed, that indeed patent term should be extended to 20 years, and that there should be no discrimination against pharmaceuticals. Does that ring a bell? Yes, well, it should, because all of those things have come to pass. That's what TRIPS says. But despite the fact that it didn't work in England, what did we do? we actually followed suit. We often hear that we need empirical economic data to show that we don't need a patent system. You know, the famous statement by Fritz Machlup in 1958, after he had spent a long time examining the US patent system, and he said something like this: well, you know, if I had to recommend the introduction of a patent system based on what we now know today, I couldn't make that recommendation. But if I had to recommend that we don't have it on the basis of what we now know, I couldn't make that recommendation either. It was, I suppose, a fair statement from an economist's point of view. But a lot of the decisions that have been made in terms of the patent system have been made without any economic study. The extension to 20 years, there is no data to show that it was even necessary. It just happened. The removal of compulsory licensing, the restrictions placed on compulsory licensing, where was the economic data that said that that was necessary? There is none. In fact, where was the economic data that said that we needed to have uniform patent laws across the world, or that, in fact, enforcement was a problem? There was none. All of these things have happened purely because of a philosophical idea that was pandering to the needs of a very specific industry, and that is the pharmaceutical industry. So we know compulsory licensing effectively has failed. Certainly in my country it has. In 106 years, there have been 3 compulsory license applications, and there have been none granted. Government use or march-in rights, again, maybe in the United States it's there as a threat, but it doesn't work anywhere else, not that I know of. It's failed. Patent pools, possibly, to some degree, but they're rarely used.
Patents are a conspiracy against the public. Patents should be abolished.
I'll just repeat that. Now, this is the man who is the Vice-Chancellor of a university in England, and he's written this book.
Patents are a conspiracy against the public. Patents should be abolished.
Okay, so it's not just me that came to this conclusion. And this is why he says that they should be abolished.
Patents are a complete scandal. And let me give you an example of why patents are such a scandal. When the Wright brothers invented the airplane in America, they patented it. And no one in America was able to fly an airplane because the Wright brothers simply sued them and brought the whole of the American airplane industry to a halt. And when America finally joined the First World War, 3 years behind the rest of us, in 1917, they found they didn't have an airplane industry. And so in 1917, a Congress abolished, or rather technically made a patent pool, but basically abolished all patents in American aviation. And so America became a patent-free zone for airplanes and all associated technologies until 1975. By 1975, guess which country was the world-leading aerospace, aeronautical, aeroplane building country? America, in the complete absence of patents. And then Nixon, for ideological reasons, reintroduced patents in 75. We can talk about that in some other way. But the point is, all empirical evidence. People take out patents to stop competitors. That's why they take out patents. And so the whole point of patents is to inhibit competition. And the one thing we know is the only reason people invest in R&D is they're terrified of the competition. So they only invest in R&D if they fear the competition is going to overtake them. The more the competition, the more they invest in R&D. The less the competition, patents are designed to stop competition, the less they invest in R&D, and the poorer we all become.
So patents really are antithetical to competition, but it's competition that really drives innovation. It's necessity that drives innovation. It's not the promise of a patent. In fact, if you look at patent systems around the world, particularly the ones that operated in Europe until 1978, you couldn't actually get a patent on a pharmaceutical substance. You could certainly get a patent on a process, but not on the substance itself. Indeed, the German patent system was established in 1877, expressly excluding patenting of chemical substances. Why did that happen? Why did they do that? One might say they were weak patents or weak patent laws, but they weren't. In fact, German technology, Germany's industrial ascendancy occurred during this period. Between 1877 and 1914, Germany provided the world's with synthetic dyes, synthetic medicines, the new chemistry, happened during a time when you had weaker patent laws than you have today. In fact, an argument could be made that weak patent laws actually encourage innovation, induce innovation. And this is the hypothesis that Terence Keeley puts forward. I now want to talk to you about a case study, because gene patents are an example, I think, of an absurdity in terms of patent law, and are a perfect example of why we should no longer tolerate patents. For 20 years now, around the world, patent offices have been granting patents over isolated genes. These things are not inventions.
And the multi-million-dollar court case over gene patenting in the US is expected to last for years. At stake are hundreds of human gene patents that have been granted on the basis that simply isolating genes is regarded as an invention. But the ownership of patents in the US has allowed one company to charge $3,200 per test for breast cancer genes. Those opposed to the patent say the same thing could happen here. Let's go now to our report from Suzanne Smith.
In a leafy suburb of Boston, 42-year-old Lisbeth Siriani and her 9-year-old daughter Bella are having breakfast and getting ready for school. Lisbeth is a single mother with breast cancer. She's had chemotherapy and a mastectomy to remove multiple tumours on both sides of her breasts. Lisbeth only found out about her family history after she was diagnosed. She learned that several female relatives on her dad's side developed cancer in their 40s and died in their early 50s.
When you have multiple tumours on both sides at a young age that are fast-growing, those are all indicators that it might be a genetic mutation.
Given her family history, Lisbeth then decided to take the next step, to do the genetic tests for the breast cancer genes BRCA1 and BRCA2.
The reason I wanted to be tested for the BRCA mutation is because if I have that mutation, my chance of developing ovarian cancer is huge. It's like 80%.
So what are the BRCA1 and 2 genes about?
The BRCA gene is something that's present in all of us.
It's a discovery, it's not an invention.
It's a discovery, correct. You can't patent Mount Everest. Why can you patent a gene?
That there's a patent on the gene itself, not on the test, not on the process, but on the actual gene. It's just mind-boggling.
So the question is, should there be patents on genes? Should there be patents on proteins? Should there be patents on natural biological materials? Right now, the Australian Senate is conducting an inquiry into gene patents. These are the terms of reference which I helped to draft. And I'll just read them through. The impact of the granting of patents in Australia over human and microbial genes and non-coding sequence and proteins and their derivatives, including those materials in an isolated form, with particular reference to the impact which the granting of patent monopolies over such materials has had, is having, and may have had on the provision and costs of healthcare, the provision of training and accreditation for healthcare professionals, the progress in medical research, and the health and well-being of the Australian people. Identifying measures that would ameliorate any adverse impacts arising from the granting of patents over such materials, including whether the Patents Act 1990 should be amended in light of any of the matters identified by the inquiry, and whether the Patents Act 1990 should be amended so as to expressly prohibit the grant of patent monopolies over such materials. That inquiry has been progressing through the Parliament for the past year. And on November the 26th, it will report to the Parliament. I find this rather amazing, really, because back in 2000, US President Clinton and British Prime Minister Blair held a press conference in Washington, D.C. And the press conference was about the decoding of the human genome. And they made the statement that raw fundamental data must be made freely available to scientists everywhere. And they made that statement because they knew that genes are raw fundamental data. I mean, a gene is nothing more than a biological repository of information which the body uses to turn into protein. Now, the reason why they wanted that data to be freely available was because they know that scientists need to be able to work with that data so that they can actually make what we would call an invention. And if we want to maximize the ability of our scientists to do that, then we need to give them maximum freedom over the building blocks of what is life on this planet. If we don't do that, if we place chains around their hands, if we raise the cost of R&D through patents, if we increase the transaction costs of research, then we are actually not encouraging innovation, but we are doing the opposite. So you would think that patents are about inventions, yet by 2005, 5 years after they made that public statement, according to a well-known published paper in Science, over 20% of the human genome was the subject of US intellectual property. Now, I find that really interesting because it's US intellectual property. I never thought the genome was actually belonged to the United States. I mean, I think we all share genomes, but no, this is US intellectual property. Well, in fact, it wasn't just US intellectual property because the companies that applied for patents in the United States applied for patents under the PCT all over the world. So what do the experts say about genes and inventions? Well, according to Professor Ian Fraser, the man who is the inventor of the vaccine Gardasil and who was Australian of the Year some years ago, says, first, there is no more invention in isolating and characterizing biological materials that exist in our bodies using existing research techniques than in collecting and arranging a set of postage stamps. And Sir John Sulston, a Nobel Prize winner in 2002, and a man who played a key role in the decoding of the human genome, says, genes are naturally occurring things, not inventions, and the heritage of humanity. Like a mountain or a river, the human genome is a natural phenomenon that existed, if not before us, then at least before we became aware of it. And the Danish Council of Bioethics. Now, they make a really interesting statement about the biotech directive. They say, in light of these reflections on the general information content of the genes, members of the Council of Ethics wish to submit that the provisions of the Danish Patents Act, Section 1A, subsections 1 and 2, appear to be full of incongruities. I love this language, appear to be full of incongruities. Section 1A, subsection 1, shows that the human body, including a sequence or partial sequence of a gene, cannot constitute patentable inventions. Okay, we know that. Accordingly, Section 1A, subsection 2 establishes that it is perfectly possible to patent a part of the human body that is isolated from it or in some other way produced by means of a technical process. Now, this is the crunch. In the members' view, it cannot be said with any reasonableness that a sequence or partial sequence of a gene ceases to be part of the human body merely because an identical copy of the sequence is isolated from or produced outside of the human body. So there you have three experts saying that an isolated human gene sequence, and I would imagine in proteins, and that are identical or substantially identical to what exists in nature are not inventions. Didn't stop the patent offices around the world for the past 20 years granting patents. What does this show? Is this just a lapse a momentary lapse in the regulation of the patent system, or is this just another example of how fundamentally flawed the patent system is? So how come patent offices around the world have granted gene patents on the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes? A gene that has been isolated from the human body is no longer part of the human body. That is the only reason. What you've just heard confirms that this is a lie. Confirms that there is no inventive step, there is no act of invention in isolating a human gene. So where do the BRCA gene mutations come from?
I got into this business years ago because it seemed to me that this was the way to keep women from dying of breast cancer and ovarian cancer. I am now absolutely convinced that is true. You are not going to die of ovarian cancer. And had this work not been done, we couldn't say that. I knew that breast cancer rates were increasing. So I thought, if I can work with women from severely affected families, perhaps we can figure out what's inherited.
After looking at 182 wrong places, we looked in the 183rd place, and it turned out to be right. Right here, on this patch of chromosome 17q.
It took from 1974 to 1990 to have very good proof that there was a gene called BRCA1 that was responsible for a substantial fraction of breast and ovarian cancer in these families.
When I found out I was BRCA positive, I did not know how to tell people.
Right.
I have a genetic mutation.
Right. You can start by saying everyone has genetic mutations. Mine is in a gene we know about. All cancer is genetic. Some of those genetic changes, the first ones, are inherited. We get one copy of every gene from our mother, and one copy of every gene from our father. Your mutation would have come through your mom. A mutation is something that has gone wrong with DNA. The genetic code is a code of words, each of 3 letters. My favorite examples is, the fat cat saw the red dog run out. You take out the FA of fat, the rest of what you have in that sentence is now nonsense. Meanwhile, a person with this mutation is completely healthy. There is nothing wrong with having one copy of a mutant BRCA1 or BRCA2 because you have the other copy guarding your genome in your breast cells and your ovarian cells. All that it takes is for the remaining normal copy to be lost, for a cell to begin to become a tumor. That's why one is so predisposed to the illness, because the first mutation is already present.
How are the BRCA gene mutations patented? Well, Silston says, promoters of gene patents argue that genes are patentable when they are isolated and purified or removed from the body and placed in a form so that they can be replicated outside the human body. This argument seems absurd to me. The essence of a gene is the information it provides, the sequence. Copying it into another format makes no difference. It is like taking a hardback book written by someone else, publishing it in paperback, and then claiming authorship because the binding is different. Now, I want to show you what a gene patent typically looks like. Now, this is an Australian document. This is for the Australian patent for the BRCA2 gene. Now, you'll see up there, if you can see it, I hope you can, but it says the title is Chromosome 13 Linked Breast Cancer Susceptibility Gene. It says that the applicants are a number of organisations. One is Myriad Genetics, and one is the trustee of the University of Pennsylvania. And there are, a number of 6 or so people named as inventors. I find that absurd, really, just on basis of what you've just seen. And the patent expires in 2016. And there are 4 patents that cover both BRCA1 and BRCA2 in Australia.
I have, they can't do what they're doing without breaching patent law.
Dr. Mervyn Jacobson currently runs this country's largest DNA testing centre for disputed paternity cases. But he's now signed a licensing deal with Myriad for the BRCA test, which makes him a very powerful man in the gene business.
So yes, we hold, according to Myriad's understanding and ours, an exclusive right to practice this testing in Australia.
Okay, so this is the managing director of a company that acquired the exclusive rights of those patents in Australia, and for him it is merely a business proposition. There are no other relevant factors. Now, we know that gene patents are not a problem that are going to go away. This is a survey of a search that I did in February this year of the Australian Patent Office statistics. It's not actually easy information to obtain for a start, because transparency is not something that is a priority for the Australian Patent Office. If they can make it hard to actually get statistics, they will, and they do. But this is the best I can come up with, but roughly 15,000 patent applications concerning genes. According to the World Intellectual Property Organization, there are currently 13,818 applications pending to do with genes. So what benefits have these patents brought to Australian hospitals and the Australian people? Well, in July 2008, that company, that man you just saw, issued a letter of demand, and there it is on the screen. And they make reference to the 4 Australian patents, and they confirm that the exclusive holder of the rights to offer genetic testing in Australia. And they say to the recipients of this letter, now the recipients were all of the public laboratories that perform breast and ovarian cancer gene testing. So these are government laboratories. And they said, you've got 7 days in which to stop doing these tests. And if you don't, we're going to take you to court. Now, that was in July 2008. And I didn't see that letter, but I saw an article that was published in the newspaper very soon after that letter was sent. And it prompted me to call the Cancer Council of Australia, and I gave them my services for free so that we could together fight this most outrageous situation.
Well, my heart sank, really, because we run a very important and busy clinical service for families who have a high risk of breast and ovarian cancer, where this genetic testing is very relevant.
A public outcry of the issue forced GTL to withdraw the legal threat and announced it was gifting its intellectual property rights to the Australian people. But the situation remains uncertain for Australia's medical researchers.
That could happen again at any time. There's nothing to stop that happening. They still do own the exclusive licence to test these genes in Australia, although they're not enforcing that at the present.
For Judy Kirk, the federal government needs to clarify the law soon, as the race is on to find a 3rd breast cancer gene, BRCA3.
For existing patents, we need to be sure that we can still use the DNA sequence, and so perhaps free licences or cost-free licences are needed in research laboratories. But we also need to know that if BRCA3 was found today, that it couldn't be patented.
Now, this is a headline that appeared in December 2008. You'll see the photograph of that man before, and the headline is "Businessman Daughter Charged Over Share Trades." And this is the same man who gifted the myriad BRCA gene patents to Australia. And in fact, he did it twice. The first time he did it was in 2003. Well, that didn't stop him or his company from making the threat that they did in 2008. Again, though, as a result of the, I suppose, public reaction, the threat was withdrawn, and for a second time, the patents were apparently donated to the Australian people. I'm not quite sure what Myriad thinks of that, but certainly that's what this man did, and he's just on his way to court in that photograph. So what are the issues? Well, a lot of these patents are about science fiction. You know, you often hear that patents are, you know, wonderful instruments of dissemination of technological information. Well, actually, they're wonderful instruments of dissemination of science fiction, because often the amount of information in the patents is minimal. It's really minimal. But what they seek to claim as inventions is extraordinarily broad, at least when it comes to these types of patents. And I'll give you an example. Cancer therapy. There is no cancer therapy for breast cancer. Yet this patent suggests that the present invention provides methods of screening drugs for cancer therapy to identify suitable drugs for restoring BRCA2 gene product function. The present invention provides means necessary for production of gene-based therapies directed at cancer cells. Well, possibly if another research team was to go away and do that research, that might happen. But there is nothing in this document which actually enables anyone to make anything that comes close to this. Science fiction. So these patents are extraordinarily ambitious, to say the least. This is another statement that you often hear, that without patents there's no incentive for research.
Myriad tests more than 500 samples a day and says that insurance covers the cost for 3/4 of its patients, and they maintain that without the sole right to work on these genes, they nor any other company would make the investment needed in the first place.
They nor any other company would make the investment needed in the first place. Well, that's a big fat lie, because really the identification of that gene, as you heard from Mary Claire King herself, happened in the United States over a 16-year period, and that was all done with government-funded money. Mary Claire King actually identified the chromosome on which the BRCA genes are, or BRCA gene 1 was. Did she get any credit? Possibly, but she's not named on the patent. And here's another example of where publicly funded research actually assisted in identifying genes relating to epilepsy. This is a prospectus, or actually a public statement, that was released by a company in Australia after it had entered into a license agreement with the University of Adelaide, the University of Melbourne. They also applied for AusIndustry grants, which is a publicly funded research grant, and the actual purpose of the grant was to accelerate efforts on the discovery of genes associated with the most common form of epilepsy. So it's very clear that, you know, even private companies rely on government monies to do this research. Indeed, and this is evidence that was given in the Senate inquiry. This is the statistics from the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute of Medical Research. It's a highly respected medical institute in Melbourne, and it shows here that out of $74.7 million in revenue, 55.2 million of that has come from Australian and US government sources, the US government source being the NIH. And wow, a whopping 1.3 million has been earned from revenues from human gene sequence patents. Well, you can see that having gene sequence patents is really going to give them lots of money, so much money that they're going to be able to continue doing their research. The reality is that without government funding, this institution would close down tomorrow. Now, in October this year, the US Secretary's Advisory Committee on Genetics, Health and Society, a committee that has been looking into the impact of gene testings and gene test patents in the United States, finally released they made a public statement in relation to a document that is yet to be made public but will soon be made public. But it's the findings of their report. And what they say is that patents do not serve as powerful incentive to conduct genetics research, to disclose genetic discoveries, or to invest in the development of genetic tests. So we know that government funding is essential to research, and now we know also, finally it's confirmed, that patents do not serve as powerful incentives in terms of this type of development. They also noted that patient access to genetic tests, while not in general affected adversely by patents, had in some cases been restricted when offered exclusively by a single or limited number of providers. This is typified by the exclusive US patent to BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes held by Myriad Genetics. So, you own your genes, but who controls what can be done with them?
And that's why we start to get...
And it's this privatisation of public health that alarms scientists like Graham Summers. This corporate gold rush that's taking control of us and our bodies.
If we fail to address it soon, then we will face the situation where there will be controlled access to your genes for diagnosis and healthcare, and indeed for the rest of Australia.
In every part of my body?
In every part of your body. Not only, so that will mean that other companies will control your access to your genes.
So patents are about encouraging innovation, not always. They can also stifle innovation.
And some argue that the company's patents deny patients an important second opinion.
Without competition within the field, there's not the incentive to either drive down the cost of testing or improve the product by offering a test that's able to be more sensitive and detect more of the disease.
Researchers also say that these patents limit their ability to develop new treatments.
So what this means...
University professors, people in the private sector, patient advocates are saying, wait a minute, what you're basically telling me is beyond the genes, you're trying to have a patent on knowledge. And if I don't have competition, I can't drive to a cheaper test, a faster test. And I would argue one thing. We always know that no test is foolproof. What if Myriad has a false positive or a false negative?
Opinion here because no one else can test the gene.
Right, and that's where I think a big concern is.
Okay, so we know that there are more than just the issues of access. It's also the fact that we need more than one type of test. We need more than one type of therapy, and we need more than one type of cure. Now, to get to that point, we need to give our scientists maximum access to these genes. Now, Ian Fraser also says, claiming a monopoly on the use of a particular gene sequence in an already existing diagnostic test method can lead to restricted public access to vital diagnostic services. So access to diagnostic services, access to medical care is absolutely critical. And I think it's very clear that the patent system in this instance, over a 20-year period, has definitely not assisted in this field.
But some on the Senate inquiry are passionately opposed to patents on genes.
If there was a case where a company who held some of these patents got into financial difficulty, and I've talked to one or two of these companies, I said, what would be the outcome with your patents? They just become a tradable financial instrument. So that you could be, you know, a money launderer, a drug runner, or a millionaire who likes, instead of collecting cars, collects patents and lives off the earnings, as it were. Who owns your body, for God's sake?
So finally, we know that the medical profession is demanding action. And here Professor Fraser says, hopefully the Senate inquiry into gene patents will begin which begins this week, and this was in March this year, will be much more direct in its recommendations. Science sits on the cusp of a surge in the use of genes in the diagnosis and treatment for major illnesses. The collegiate tradition of sharing raw data among researchers must be allowed to continue unfettered so new technologies can be developed to benefit all. Major medical science breakthroughs such as Pasteur's immunology discoveries or Florey's penicillin antibiotic were gifted to humankind for global benefit. They have contributed enormously to the increases in life expectancy we enjoy today. Clearly, medical science has evolved phenomenally. Patent law remains rooted in its own dark age. Well, it has specific implications for women of Jewish descent. This is another absurd situation. A report that was provided to me about what was going on in Europe during the oppositions to the BRCA1 genes are quite amazing. I'll just read one quote. To summarise the oral hearings of June 29, 2005, the amended patent has not been changed. That is, we have not gotten anywhere with our arguments about novelty, inventive step, etc. So it wasn't worth spending the time in Munich. That's a reference to the European Patent Office. However, please note that even if this looks like a defeat, it is not. This is not a defeat. If one compares the present patent with the original one has to admit that we have come a long way. In practice, as a result of the amendment, BRCA2 testing is now largely possible in Europe. Only the test for the 6974 DELT in Ashkenazi women is subject to proprietary regulations. In other words, if you were an Ashkenazi Jewish woman, you were caught by the patent, otherwise you weren't. How absurd is that? And then they say, no one has filed appeals against the decision on the BRCA2 Ashkenazi mutation. So it seems that the patent owners are happy. I've been told that I can go for as long as I like. So it seems that the patent owners are happy with the patent on the use of a probe to detect the 6174 DELT mutation, while the opponents did not want to waste funds on an appeal against the Ashkenazi decision, for the good reason that the EPO would probably have to make the same decision in appeal because of the lack of a basis in the European Patent Convention to discard the claim on ethical grounds. So the BRCA2 Ashkenazi patent will stand until 2015. Well, here's another example of an absurdity within the European patent system. Unfortunately, the European Patent Office eventually upheld the patent, so a lot of the discrimination has gone, but a lot of the issues still remain.
Lisbeth Siriani is now saving her money to help pay for the BRCA1 and 2 tests because Myriad Corporation has rejected her insurance company's offer to pay for it.
My daughter just turned 9, and I am a single mom. I feel like I have to teach her everything like right now, because what if I'm not here when she's 12? You know, so it can be a bit overwhelming. Ironically, the patents will run out, and she'll be able to be tested herself then to know what her risk is.
1 in 11 women die of breast cancer in Australia. A resolution of the issue is important for their future care and treatment. Suzanne Smith, Lateline.
Now you might say, well, that's just an isolated example, gene patents, Myriad, breast cancer, but it's not. It's just the tip of an iceberg. I've only got time today to give you one example. Right now in the United States, the case of Henry Bilski is on its way to the Supreme Court. It concerns business methods. In the future, there will be no doubt other areas, other technologies that are going to pose specific problems. But I think what it clearly shows is that patents are problematic. Are they actually worth it? That's the question that I pose. And I think after 136 years of really trying hard to live with it, I think we have to come to a serious reanalysis of it. And I think to actually do Fritz Macklock some justice, let's actually get the data to prove that it doesn't work. Thank you.
Luigi? Congratulations for your challenging presentation and paper. I'm sure a lot of discussions will come from this. Eu apresento agora Carolina Rossini, da Universidade de Harvard, e John Wilbank, da Creative Commons, que apresentarão um paper sobre Universities and NGOs in the Knowledge Governance, the Role of Emerging Institutions.
Oi, boa tarde. Eu acho que a gente tem um desafio gigante aqui após a apresentação do Luigi, que foi maravilhosa, que está dentro de uma das nossas linhas de pesquisa também. Eu acho que é impressionante o tapa na cara que ele acabou de dar na gente, como as informações estão claras, estão aí, e agora é a gente decidir politicamente o que deve ser feito em relação a isso, em relação a determinadas tecnologias. Então, eu agradeço muito, eu acho que o link com a nossa apresentação é muito oportuno. Então, muito obrigada, Luigi, por a sua apresentação. Eu só vou explicar em um segundo a estrutura da nossa apresentação. Há um tempo atrás, eu escrevi a minha tese comparando o sistema de inovação do Brasil e dos Estados Unidos, focado especificamente com a questão das patentes, o quanto elas bloqueiam ou não inovação, e foi uma pesquisa bem teórica, high level, etc. E agora eu estou coordenando uma pesquisa em Harvard de 2 anos, que, na verdade, a gente está mergulhando verticalmente em setores tecnológicos, né, para entender se alguns desses pressupostos que a gente vê claramente a problemática em Diagnostic Kits também se aplicam a outras áreas de conhecimento e tecnologia, né? São essas: a energia alternativa, recursos educacionais, alga para a produção de energia alternativa, bactéria para a produção de energia alternativa, e algumas outras, na verdade, né? São várias. Eu tenho um time de pesquisa, graças a Deus, grande e muito competente. E o John, ele dirige o Science Commons, que é a área de ciência do Creative Commons, que vem trabalhando mais de 5 anos em como pensar a questão de compartilhamento de conhecimento para a inovação em ciência, especificamente em biotecnologia, e agora eles estão rumando um pouquinho para toda a área de tecnologia em sustentabilidade. E aí a gente achou aqui um intercâmbio de interesses de pesquisa, e na verdade a gente pensou que como a gente poderia propor uma framework, né, uma estrutura um pouquinho, né, sair um pouco e observar de um plano mais alto, uma estrutura para falar, todas essas áreas tecnológicas têm algumas coisas semelhantes, que são a questão de acesso a determinados bens que possuem conhecimento, né, the knowledge embedded goods, que a gente discutiu em algumas outras palestras nas partes anteriores. Então, em termos de estrutura de apresentação, o John vai fazer a introdução, e aí depois eu vou falar um pouquinho da parte das universidades. Tá? Muito obrigada por estarem aqui hoje.
So I apologize. I'm going to do my part of this in English. Trust me, you don't want to hear me speak Portuguese. And this will be, in many ways, complementary, I hope, to what Luigi was talking about. Because what Luigi is talking about is the way that patents govern the utility of knowledge. And what we're going to talk about in ours more is the flow of the knowledge underneath that utility layer, and the importance of understanding how to make the treatments work and come together. So the first piece of this is that when we put knowledge onto the internet, many of its fundamental characteristics change. Closer or further away? Closer. So many of the fundamental characteristics of the internet change the characteristics of knowledge. And it's a function of the way that we have to write the information down and distribute it that you get these changes in the network. So we could start with where the Greeks talk about knowledge as justified true belief. We can also look at what the Oxford English Dictionary says knowledge is. So in the first case, it's expertise, skill, and theoretical practical understanding of a subject. This is one way to think of knowledge. A second is the total of what is known in a particular field or in total, facts and information. And a third would be the awareness or familiarity gained by experience, craft, technique. And so the network allows us to propagate each of these 3 classes of information in a completely different way than has been traditional. And this applies to scientific knowledge as well as to more craft or folk knowledge, but I'm going to be focusing here on science knowledge. So the form of knowledge transmission was set almost 400 years ago with the creation of the academic journal in the UK, the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. And all of the forms of knowledge transmission and scholarship are conserved from this original beginning. We have a date, we have a volume, we have the name of the journal and the name of the article. And the idea was that in order to transfer knowledge, we had to write it down in a compressed form because there had to be an economic incentive to print and to distribute the printed knowledge. And this follows through. This is the first journal of the Cambridge Entomological Club, which studies insects at Harvard. It's one of the oldest scientific societies in the United States. Volume, location, month, year, author. Again, conserved from 1665 to 1874 to today. And this is what that same journal of entomological research looks like today. Now, it is a fully digital journal now. There is no print copy that's mailed around, yet we retain page numbers, volume numbers. All of the hallmarks of a printed way of distributing knowledge are conserved, even though none of them are necessary anymore. And this artificial compression of knowledge into something that is printable and distributable basically drives all of the governance of the knowledge that moves around in scholarship this way. So there's 4 classic elements to the governance. The first is registration. When did someone have an idea? And who is the person that had it? And this is one of the linkages to patents, of course, which is that the function of registering an idea is an old piece of knowledge governance in the sciences, because it either guarantees that academically you own the idea from a credit perspective or economically you own it from a patent perspective, although not necessarily in the US versus the rest of the world. Certification, the idea that the argument that you've made or the assertion you make is true, that it's been verified through some sort of peer review or other verification process. This is the second classic governance function that operates on the article. Dissemination has always been the province of the publisher of information. Preservation of that information, this is where the libraries come in their partnership with the publishers. But what's important to realize is that these are all services provided to the author of the knowledge, not to the user of the knowledge. So the entire knowledge governance system is structured on behalf of the writer, not the reader. And sort of noticing that it's guilds, it's these scientific societies and guilds that govern the registration, certification, dissemination, and preservation of the knowledge. And they have a vested interest in making sure that there is no crowd of people who aren't members of the guild who are allowed to make a comment. And this is propagated through the entire way that we educate scientists and scholars. They become reductionist. They focus on very narrow areas of science. They learn a language that's obscure to people who are outside the guild. Right? It's this very medieval apprenticeship process that you go through, particularly in the life sciences. And this worked actually moderately well to guarantee that bad science, essentially, at least in the 20th century, didn't get out to the users to be threatening. But it's all being completely disrupted by the emergence of new institutions which come from the network. And these don't look at all like the institutions that have grown up around traditional science, which tend to be sort of centered around academic institutions, industrial organizations and corporations, and government funding. Right, so this is the traditional triple helix or Sabatos triangle of innovation in science and technology in the developed world and in the developing world. But if you think about the impact on knowledge governance of these new institutions, let's think about the impact on knowledge governance of laboratory blogging. So we have a date stamp for each of these posts. That is a timestamp and a registration stamp in the knowledge governance context. We have the ability through commenting and criticism to have a measure of verification. Anyone with an internet browser can have this information disseminated to them even on their phone. And from a preservation concept, you're allowed to make a copy of it. Anyone is allowed to make a copy of it. So although we have a weaker form of each of those 4 forms of knowledge governance, each of those is much more scalable than it was when it was controlled by a guild. And this completely disintermediates traditional systems of governance of knowledge in the article context. But it goes well beyond the article, because we no longer have to worry about printing out and mailing. This is a DNA sequencer. This is one of those machines outside the human body that isolates and tells you what the A's, T's, and C's, and G's are in your genome. I'm going to show you how much they cost on eBay in a second. But suffice to say that the availability of these things, combined with the emergence of the internet, means that it's possible now to disseminate an amount of data that was never disseminatable when we printed and mailed it out. You would not print out the phone book of New York City or São Paulo or Rio de Janeiro and mail it every week, because it wouldn't be economically sensible from a knowledge perspective. But it's, in fact, what's happening in the genetic context. So this is the growth curve of genetic data that comes from the ubiquitous access to these machines. And just as a side point, our brain capacity per person is flat over the same time period. So we're suddenly able to access more information, distribute more information, but our individual capacity isn't growing. And one of the only methodologies we have is to work together, because the only curve that follows the data curve is our population curve. And if we can find a way to bring those 2 pieces together, then we have a chance to actually bring new knowledge governance systems into play that can keep up with this sort of system. Now, the other piece of this that was, again, not distributable and therefore not governable in any sort of organized system was the technology. So knowledge gets embedded into technology. And the network also gives us the chance to distribute technology-embedded knowledge in a very different way. So if you were a member of the guild, you could probably access pieces of the technology. You could access a mouse or a set of stem cells because you could contact another member of the guild. But the internet gets in the way of that as well. So I ran this search this morning. If you'd like to buy a DNA sequencer here in Brazil, it will cost you $1,000 plus shipping. You can run this in your garage now. Right? This is cheaper than a computer in Brazil. Right? Your average Dell in Brazil costs 4,000 reais. Your DNA sequencer costs 2,000 reais. And this is to read the sequences of information. If you'd like to write the sequences, if you'd like to go from the digital to the physical, you can go to mrgene.com, and for 66 cents on the dollar, turn your digital information into physical information. And so all of these knowledge governance systems that evolved for the article are breaking down in the face of ubiquitous access to the data and to the machines that allow you to do this work. So when we look at it in a newer perspective, you have at least three classes of knowledge units. You have narratives, which include the articles but now extend to wikis and to blogs and other kinds of narrative text on the web. You have data, and I have data in quotes because data means a lot of different things. One kind of data is what we call foundational information. It's data that's the same for all of us, like the human genome or the height of Mount Everest. Another kind of data would actually be experimental data about the behavior of the genes. And I think we need to treat experimental data a little differently than foundational data because it has much more of a creative spark attached to it, at least in the way that we think about it, if not in the legal context. And then technologies. So technologies are generated all the time in the lab. A vast minority are actually patented. Right? They cause problems. But competitive withholding on the other inventions created with government funding is, in my opinion, as much as a tragedy as the patent tragedy, if not more so. The stuff that's sitting in freezers in the United States, never being distributed, never being shared, never being moved around, is actually really damaging research. And so knowledge transfer now moves from I learn by reading to I learn by sitting in a meeting to I learn by actually getting onto the network. And that means that knowledge is now in permanent beta. And it's actually always been in permanent beta. We just pretended that it was real and that it was fixed because it was written down and it was hard to change. There's a hilarious story about trying to criticize and correct an incorrect academic article. It was a 65-point process that the author went through before he quit, gave up, and simply published his 65-point critique on the web, where it suddenly became one of the hottest scientific articles of the month. So the old way of correcting these things ignored the fact that we were in permanent beta. The new ways make that easy, but the question now is, who governs? And the answer really is nobody and everybody. So when you look at distributed or open knowledge governance and knowledge creation and knowledge distribution systems, they have 4 core characteristics that we find. There are other ways of doing this. For the purposes of this study, we came up with these 4. The first is shared open standards. In the same way that we need a shared language to communicate, if we don't share a technical way to disseminate knowledge, we can't have any sort of collective knowledge generation or governance. The second is a shared infrastructure. So it's not enough to just have the web and the internet. We actually need to have databases where data can go. We need to have shared names for things so that when Luigi talks about BRCA1 and I talk about some other name that I've given for it because I live in a different country, right? Some genes have as many as 100 synonyms for this reason, that we can actually identify all the information. Third is you need democratized access. It can't be available only to the elite. I've heard a lot of conversation these past 4 days about first-class and second-class citizens. Well, there are very few first-class citizens in science. They control the guilds, but they don't bring enough people for any of these distributed systems to work. And the fourth is rights granted in advance to the user, as opposed to rights concerned by default at the beginning to the author. So these 4 principles are what we find when you look at Wikipedia. Right, Wikipedia runs on a shared technical infrastructure, which is the MediaWiki platform. It operates under a copyleft copyright license. Everyone uses the same technical infrastructure. Everyone uses the same basic standards to interoperate. You find the same thing with Linux and other open source systems. The commonality of technical, legal, standards, semantic, and social shared practices plus infrastructure is what you see over and over again in successful instances of distributed or open knowledge creation. And what's funny is that at no point do you have to ask what the incentive is for any of those one small parts to be a part of the process. They don't do it because they think they'll get a patent and their children will be rich, or because they'll be paid their children will be paid 70 years after they die for the copyright. What happens is when you wrap the world in internet and spin it really fast, free software and free content emerges. So Eben Moglen calls this, it's Moglen's metaphorical corollary to Faraday's law, which is that like electricity, which happens when you put a certain set of things together and spin them, you get an emergent property of the system, which is collaboration. And the question isn't why do they do it, the question is what's the resistance in the wire to the collaboration? And Moglen hypothesized it was the field strength of the intellectual property regime associated with the wire. And so copyleft was enough in free software because it built on this other set of infrastructures. And so here's a short list of infrastructure for Wikipedia and for GNU Linux. So first is you have to have a database where you can put the code or the content. You can't just put it up onto a web page. It doesn't work that way. You have to have a governance system that operates on mailing lists and edit talk pages. Right? This is a social technical infrastructure at the same time. You have to have a culture that says you're going to do fast versioning according to standard data formats or standard code formats. You have to have a system for disagreement, which essentially says if you don't like me, take it and change it, but don't bother me anymore, which is called the right to fork the code. And so the open rights licenses sit on top of all of this. They are scientifically an enzyme. They're the last piece of the puzzle, not the basis of it all. And the standard interfaces are what bring all of this together. These are actually the institutions now that govern knowledge, not the old industrial, academic, governmental triangle. And interoperability actually is the key condition for these new institutions. It's what they share. So this is a fairly famous graph of the internet, and I'm going to stand up and try to not fall down. At the bottom is the physical layer. This is whether if you're doing wireless access, that's the physical layer, or Ethernet, or dial-up. That's the physical layer. Then you have a data link layer, which is the drivers between your computer and the network. Above that is the network layer, so that's the IPv4 or IPv6. Then, only then, do you get to the transport layer for data. Above that, you actually have a socket layer, and then at the top, you have the application layer. So this sits below everything that's below the web. Because of this concept of separation of concerns, none of these boxes have anything to do with each other than passing each other information in a standardized way. And that means that at every layer, you can have distinct levels of innovation that interoperate, because you're not worried about, if you're at the transport layer, you're not worried about the socket layer or the network layer. You have a methodology to send information back and forth. Everything else is a black box. And this basically scales all the way up, right? When the people built the internet standards, they didn't know that we would have YouTube or Overmundo. But because they allowed for a standard interface, those were allowed to emerge. The rights were granted to the user to move any kind of bits they wanted, not just video bits or text bits or picture bits, right? The concerns were separated between each layer. And what we're seeing is that this now applies to knowledge governance institutions. It's not just a technical concept. This is a beautiful graph by Daniel Weitzner, who used to be at the Web Consortium. He now works with the Obama administration, that shows in the information society, one layer is users. One layer is developers. One layer is technical standards. One layer is shared infrastructure. One layer is economic development, and another layer is the rule of law. And if we don't apply the concepts of interoperability and separation of concerns to society in the way that we deal with knowledge governance and knowledge transfer, you'll get interference. And that's what copyrights are to scientific information on the internet. They're pushing from one layer into another layer and creating friction and stopping innovation. And we'll see that this can happen even in the desire to have open systems. It's not always a consequence of bad people trying to get more property. Sometimes it's a consequence of good people trying to be free, but not understanding the way that things interoperate or don't. And the key concept of this is to retain modular flexibility between layers. This is the most important concept, is when you design social work, when you design legal work, when you design technical work, you want to preserve flexibility. And what you find is that the more control you design into the system, the less flexible it is. It's a very standard technical result. So a case study, and this is not a proper academic case study because I am not a proper academic, Carol is, but what we've done is look at genomics. So genomics is the attempt to take physical information, our DNA, and turn it into standard digital information, A's, T's, C's, and G's. And the best known example of this is what was called the Human Genome Project, a 13-year project that cost billions of dollars, that originated in the United States but soon became international, to sequence the genome that we have in common, that all of us have. And the reason that we want to study the Human Genome Project is it gives us some very interesting concepts and ideas and clues about knowledge governance on fundamental scientific data and information and what works and what doesn't. It's also of note because there was a private competitor called Celera Genomics in the United States that was attempting to create a private version of the common genome. And at one point, they were so far ahead of the public effort that there was a real discussion in the United States to cancel the public effort, to say, listen, you know what? This is something that private industry does better. And there was no patent issue really here in this context. It was a trade secret issue. The idea is that you would pay for access to their database and you would give away the right to redistribute the database. There were hearings in Congress that said essentially, we don't need this massive taxpayer waste to generate the public information. And so, thankfully, the leadership in Washington made some good choices. And sometimes you get lucky and you have the right people in government at the right time. And we had the right people at the NIH, and we had the right people in Congress. And what happened was, instead of abandoning the public project, we sent away the scientists to a beautiful island called Bermuda and gave them orders essentially not to come out until they had figured out how to put their data online. What they discovered was the data was being generated in the public effort just as fast as the private effort, but it wasn't being published. And what they found out was that the people who were making the data were worried that they would lose their publication rights. So there was this competitive withholding problem that was keeping people from publishing. They were worried they wouldn't get the next grant if someone else wrote the big paper. And they came out with this thing called the Bermuda Rules. And this actually we owe to John Sulston, who Luigi referenced in his presentation. Sir Sulston is actually a member of our advisory board, and I've been very lucky and honored to spend a lot of time with him learning about how this worked. And again, it was the right people in the right place. And if there's one theme that can come out of this, it's the right people if they use this sort of infrastructure correctly, can actually have an enormous impact in an open context. So this is what the Bermuda Rules said. First of all, the backlog, the stuff that you've already discovered, that goes into the databases online immediately. And everything new that comes off the machine goes online within 24 hours into the public domain. Full stop. Now, the one restriction that was held on this was not a legal restriction, but was a cultural restriction, which was said that the people who deposit the data have the first right to publish on the sum total of their data. But if you violated that, you were not going to be sued for copyright infringement. You were a plagiarist. You were a scientific violator, and you would be dealt with like a scientist. Now, just like we saw in Linux and Wikipedia, there's other infrastructure. There was this repository the US government also created called the National Center for Biotechnology Information. It's where the data went. It's available to everyone in the world. There's no registration. It's truly open. The rights are granted to the user in advance. This is the default setting of US government data, which is that US government data is in the public domain. It's not copyrighted. Now, there's also standardized data formats, names, queries, software systems, browsers, and all of this together brought this eruption of distributed creativity. Now, papers are a part of that, but so are patents. Right? They supposedly at least represent creativity. Tools, software, annotations. And then the second piece of this was an attempt to say, well, now we know what we share in common. Let's see what's different about us. This is called the HapMap project. This is mapping the differences between people, not the similarities. What's amazing is because it's open, it's already been translated into Yoruba, which is probably the last language that a business would translate scientific and genetic information to, which is a West African dialect. But what's interesting here is that in the service of openness, they attempted to reach from the data to the patent world and say, if you access our data, you've got to sign a click-wrap contract in which you waive the right to get a patent and abuse it back against the community. I'm generalizing badly, but that's essentially what it said. Now, the problem is this violated the separation of concerns. It was found that the license actually didn't inhibit patenting. What was helping in patenting was the public disclosure of so many gene sequences by creating a vast set of prior art. But what they found was that the license actually blocked data integration. Because it had a different legal constraint that no other genome data had, we couldn't integrate the things we had in common with the things that were different into a single database. And so they actually wound up lifting the click-wrap license that they had created in the service of freedom. Because as it turned out, the enforcement of openness prevented technical innovation through data integration and data redistribution. And in the same context, companies actually began putting their data into the public domain as a defensive patenting policy. So Merck put their entire gene index into the public domain to advance and speed the field, but also to make sure that there weren't any more dumb gene patents coming down the pike to them, because those would reach through and affect their drug revenues. So they began adopting the public domain for a totally different reason, because the infrastructure to deposit it was there and to make it useful was there. And we see now Merck doing the exact same thing with disease biology. They've taken nearly $1 billion worth of data, software, tools, patents, people, and put them into a nonprofit organization for disease biology because they don't want more pathway patents and sort of patents that we heard earlier. So it's sort of two pieces, two presentations coming at the same problem from a different angle. And the sum total of this is that you can go from something foundational, and you can, which is a sequence, and you can begin to say, using the software and the infrastructure, what's similar across genomes, and you can get meaning out of that. You can figure out what the genes are and what they do. And this is that process that they went through with BRCA1 and BRCA2. But instead of having it be only the province of people in the US who have NIH funding, the ability to do this is now being slowly but surely democratized, so that anyone with a web browser and the sufficient biological understanding can come to that understanding. And Carol's going to finish it up here.
Bem, eu vou fazer a minha parte em português de qualquer forma para o público poder acompanhar, e o John está cansado de saber o que é que eu estou falando aqui. Bem, mas na verdade, quando a gente vê toda essa questão de como governar o conhecimento de uma forma que permita o acesso democrático e a participação de atores inesperados, né, eu comecei a pensar um pouquinho, a gente começou a pensar um pouquinho na questão de qual seria o ator que é parte das instituições, das old institutions, né, das instituições tradicionais, que poderia servir como porta de entrada a esse mundo, né, que poderia conectar toda essa criatividade que está distribuída, né, aquela questão de pensar que nós numa empresa, ou nós numa universidade, ou nós num governo, não detemos todas as pessoas mais inteligentes e mais criativas do mundo, né? Então, qual seria o ator responsável por fazer esses links e aplicar esse conceito que a gente está discutindo aqui, de separação de concerns e também a criatividade distribuída. E, na verdade, a gente pensou que a universidade é exatamente esse ator para criar esses links com o público, com a sociedade, com todas essas formas que estão pipocando por aí, e são possíveis pela questão da tecnologia da informação e pela transformação de bens que antes eram bens físicos, como um ratinho, né? um material biológico, etc., em informações que são contidas em databases, né? E essas informações circularem da forma que o John estava explicando para a gente antes. A universidade, ela continua ela está ainda naquele papel de old institution, porque ela está no centro de muitas teorias de inovação, como a teoria que vem do triângulo de Sábato, como a teoria da triple helix, 1, 2 and 3, qual o número que vem aí a seguir. E ela, na verdade, principalmente no Brasil, quando a gente vê hoje a questão da lei de inovação, e mesmo comparando o que aconteceu nos Estados Unidos, ela está fortemente conectada com ela é colocada num lugar de destaque nessa relação indústria e governo, né? Então, quem teria, de repente, essa obrigação de vincular indústria e governo nessa o que a gente chama de ER&D, né? Essa infraestrutura digitalizada de pesquisa e investigação. Isso, como eu disse, vem um pouquinho de algumas teorias da inovação hoje, que são chamadas nos Estados Unidos inovação aberta, né? Open Innovation, criada pelo Henry Chesbrough da Escola Business lá de Berkeley, e também pelo professor de economia do MIT, Eric von Hippel, que ele trabalha um outro lado, que é a parte de inovação user-driven innovation, né? A inovação que vem do usuário, tá? E ambas teorias, elas são teorias diferentes, de pensamentos diferentes, de escolas diferentes, né, e com implicações diferentes. Aqui, por exemplo, eu trago um pouco a questão do Chesbrough, que é esse reconhecimento que eu já mencionei, e que o John mencionou nesse exemplo. Por exemplo, a gente viu o Happy Map traduzido para uma língua africana, para um dialeto africano. Isso é a expressão clara do reconhecimento que, se abrirmos o conhecimento de uma forma estruturada e em camadas, que foi a proposição aqui apresentada anteriormente, a gente reconhece e traz para o jogo da inovação pessoas espertas que não estão dentro da nossa, que não estão formalmente dentro das nossas instituições, tá? E como a user-driven innovation, né, a inovação gerada pelo indivíduo que está no campo, pelo indivíduo que está utilizando um processo na empresa dele que, na verdade, não funciona, e eu vou trazer alguns exemplos daqui a pouco. Então, User-Driven Innovation reconhece que os usuários possuem conhecimento relevante às suas próprias necessidades, enquanto a Open Innovation reconhece que muitas pessoas espertas estão fora da instituição. Então, como a universidade pode se utilizar dessas ideias, reconhecer essas teorias da inovação e trazer para dentro de si essas ambas teorias, né, e não reconhecer somente o conhecimento formal que é produzido dentro da universidade. E eu falo em universidade porque eu não enxergo esse papel, por exemplo, no governo ou nas empresas, né? Da universidade pública, principalmente, né? Qual é o papel da universidade pública como espaço público para agregar esse conhecimento que está disperso na sociedade. Então, alguns exemplos, na verdade, da User-Driven Innovation, né? Porque já são exemplos, estudos de caso. O Eric Van Rippel, ele tem vários livros publicados com estudos de caso. Um, por exemplo, aconteceu nos Estados Unidos, que um agricultor ele tinha dificuldade de fazer toda a irrigação no seu campo, e ele falou, pera lá, eu tenho a bicicleta, eu tenho essa mangueira, por que eu não junto os dois? Então, foi o usuário que, dentro das suas necessidades cotidianas, criou um novo sistema de irrigação, tá? A mesma coisa a gente vê hoje, esse é um exemplo um pouco fora do nosso estudo de caso, que é a biotecnologia, mas existem também exemplos atuais na biotecnologia que são permitidos pela essa questão das ferramentas já estarem distribuídas e pelo custo dessas ferramentas estarem em constante declínio, né? Tem uma discussão grande, na verdade, quão é o acesso a essas ferramentas e quanto, na verdade, é o número de PhDs que são capazes de fazer essa pesquisa, mas isso a gente vai deixar por um outro momento, e eu e o John, a gente tem I6 escrito sobre essa disputa. Na biologia, por exemplo, a gente tem uma comunidade de usuários que criou o que eles chamam a biologia que você faz você mesmo, né? Do Yourself Biology. E é muito engraçado porque um dos meus pesquisadores assistentes é um dos fundadores desse projeto. Então, eu observo bem de perto o que esse pessoal de 22, 23 anos de idade estão fazendo hoje no dia a dia deles. E eles criaram, por exemplo, um dos problemas nessa parte de biologia é a parte do gel, né, onde você cultiva a reprodução de bactérias, etc. E eles criaram esse gel Electrolysis Box de muito baixo custo e de fácil distribuição. E aí o que aconteceu, né? O usuário inovou e criou a sua própria ferramenta, uma empresa foi lá, melhorou o design disso, né? Tornou mais user-friendly, etc., e agora está vendendo essa caixa. Então, a gente também vê empresas já aproveitando essa inovação que vem do usuário para inovar e para reverter em produtos para você. E essa inovação não aconteceu dentro da empresa, a única coisa que a gente teve foi um design da inovação feita pelo usuário. E a gente tem também, a gente não pode esquecer do Brasil e da África, que muitos exemplos, na verdade, vêm daqui. Então, quando a gente pensa um pouco nas favelas, a gente tem alguns exemplos que eu vou citar um pouquinho mais para frente, na área de canos, de eletrodomésticos e etc. E eu vou citá-los daqui a pouco. Então, na verdade, assim, a gente tem que pensar um pouco o que todos esses exemplos que eu estou trazendo e que eu vou também trazer alguns daqui a pouco, eles têm em comum, né? Eles têm em comum a necessidade de resolver um problema local, tá? Para satisfazer com conhecimento local. E isso a gente já vê também em grandes empresas adotando mecanismos. Então, por exemplo, nos Estados Unidos tem um exemplo da INCT, né, que é uma plataforma colaborativa que empresas farmacêuticas colocam problemas complicados naquela plataforma e chamam a comunidade para resolver esses problemas. É muito engraçado, antes de vir para cá, a gente estava em Boston e a gente participou de uma reunião e o diretor estratégico dessa farmacêutica estava nessa reunião e estava contando por que a gente lançou o Innocentive. E ele falou, olha, a gente lançou o Innocentive há anos atrás e, na verdade, a gente começou a usar há 5, 6 anos atrás, né? Então, foi uma coisa muito experimental para eles. Eles estavam falando, olha, um problema complexo como esse, dentro da minha farmacêutica, leva 1 ou 2, 3 anos e me custa bilhões de dólares. Nesse último ano de existência da Innocentive, 400 problemas complexos foram solucionados pela comunidade que participou da Innocentive via internet, e eles gastaram apenas $20 mil, provendo essa estrutura colaborativa que possibilita o usuário participar. Então, na verdade, como a universidade precisa perceber isso e incorporar essa comunidade que está lá informal e que está lá inovando, de uma forma mais formal a sua cadeia de inovação. Principalmente a questão da universidade pública, tá? E nos Estados Unidos isso também está sendo repensado um pouquinho. Então é mais ou menos esse slide aqui que representa um pouco como ligar toda a sociedade e os indivíduos que estão ao redor dessas old institutions à cadeia de inovação da old institution, tá? E o John está me lembrando aqui, eu pedi para ele me interromper toda hora que eu esqueci alguma coisa, é a questão de se a universidade não acordar para isso de uma forma mais rápida, a gente vai perder a corrida para as empresas, vai perder a corrida, que eu não estou falando que é algo bom ou ruim, não. Eu estou falando o seguinte, como a gente pode trazer essa informalidade para uma formalidade, tá? E constantemente compartilhar esse conhecimento com a sociedade, né? E aí eu penso um pouco, na minha tese eu discuti muito, com base na Constituição e nas políticas de educação, qual que é o papel da universidade pública, tá? Então, depois eu posso disponibilizar para vocês. E é essa questão, né? Não somente estudantes. E não, na verdade, aqui para concluir um pouco, a gente tem um chamado para uma ação do Brasil, né? Eu acho que muitas das coisas que a gente estamos discutindo aqui, a gente tem uma responsabilidade muito grande em pensar nos próximos passos em termos de política pública para implementar muitas das coisas que foram discutidas aqui. Algumas coisas são muito teóricas, mas algumas coisas são muito práticas, né? A questão da própria apresentação do Luigi, do Ken Sandler, a gente traz muito isso. São decisões políticas que podem ser tomadas e a lei, do jeito que está hoje, sustenta essas decisões políticas, tá? E qual o papel da universidade em avaliar qual o conteúdo ou qual o conhecimento que ela vai colocar sob uma forma de patente e qual o conhecimento que ela vai colocar disponível ao público, tá? Eu tenho uma preocupação muito grande com a questão da lei de inovação e a universidade achar que a patente é a solução para todos os problemas financeiros da universidade, né? Mas isso é um pouquinho outra discussão. Então, a chamada as universidades vão precisar pensar um pouquinho nessa teoria da separação dos separation of concerns, para pensar nas políticas que vão reger a produção de conhecimento na universidade, do laboratório, à publicação, aos niches, à patente, tá? E já existem algumas discussões sobre, por exemplo, licença de responsabilidade social e algumas outras discussões na área de como você gerencia o licenciamento das tecnologias que são produzidas na universidade, exatamente para ter em conta essa questão de esse conteúdo vale patentear, esse conteúdo não vale patentear. E a gente também tem que chamar o legislativo e o judiciário, na verdade, a pensar um pouquinho como vai gerar o enforcement dessas políticas. Tá? Nos Estados Unidos, o Federal Circuit foi um dos grandes responsáveis pelo aumento dos estándares de concessão de patente. E hoje a gente está observando uma revisão muito grande dessas decisões não patenteamento de um monte de coisa em função da obviedade ou em função de ter um processo mental envolvido na parte de diagnósticos e que esse processo não pode ser expresso, então não poderia ser patenteável e assim por diante, né? Só os slides finais sobre a recomendação, que eu e o John, a gente traz um pouco disso. Ok. Uma é a questão de sempre pensar nessa interoperabilidade como primeiro princípio. Tá? E a interoperabilidade como primeiro princípio já nos dá algumas direções que, na verdade, as políticas já estão aí e já são adotadas largamente no mundo inteiro. Uma questão é toda a política de open access, né, de acesso aberto aos resultados dos scholars, das publicações. A questão de data, tem uma discussão muito grande de open access to databases agora, e já existem algumas diretrizes em como isso pode ser implementado, pensando um pouquinho nos nomes iguais, na interoperabilidade do formato das databases e assim por diante, e também a parte de research tools. Teve um estudo muito grande nos Estados Unidos, liderado pela professora Fiona Murray, que estudou a questão dos ratos, né, que são essenciais para a pesquisa em câncer, por exemplo. E os ratos, um tinha patente, o oncomouse, e outro não tinha patente. Mas o grande problema não era a patente sobre o mouse, era o contrato de acesso ao ratinho, né? Como eu consigo esse ratinho de um laboratório, de um repositório que eles chamam de biobanks. E, finalmente, uma das outras áreas que eu trabalho muito é a questão de recursos educacionais abertos. Quais são as formas e as políticas e as plataformas e estratégias que já existem para trazer essas pessoas para a universidade? E tem toda a questão dos recursos educacionais abertos, que é você abrir o conhecimento da universidade para o indivíduo, e aí o indivíduo abre o seu conhecimento para você. Tem um green paper que foi lançado semana passada sobre isso, e eu e um grupo de outras pessoas, a gente vai estar participando da Conferência Nacional de Educação ano que vem, exatamente para discutir o papel dos recursos educacionais abertos na política de educação do Brasil. E, finalmente, a questão de infraestrutura, que são uma outra camada. Na verdade, cada um desses pertence a uma daquelas camadas que o John estava mostrando, né? A questão de cyber infrastructure, como você vincula um instituto de pesquisa, como vincular a Fiocruz, a estrutura interna de tecnologia da Fiocruz, com a estrutura interna da UFRJ, por exemplo. E a National Academy of Science dos Estados Unidos, eles estão há 5 anos trabalhando nisso, já existem vários estándares, várias recomendações, etc, etc. Ou seja, muitos dos caminhos já estão aí. A questão é como pensá-los, como pensar a implementação disso em camadas e tendo a universidade como um líder dessa questão. E, finalmente, claro, a interoperabilidade has a first principle, pensando numa aplicação de propriedade intelectual de forma balanceada, o que realmente vale a pena patentear e o que não vale a pena patentear. Né? Em recursos educacionais abertos e mesmo em patente, a gente está discutindo muito que o que vem de dinheiro público deveria ser aberto. Né? Então, tem toda uma discussão sobre o que a gente chama taxpayer money. Tanto em termos de leis como em termos de licença. Como você maneja de uma forma flexível as licenças do conhecimento produzido na universidade para gerar essa participação mais aberta. Eu acho que, na verdade, esse princípio de interoperabilidade é que a gente pensa esse commons, né, esse conjunto de conhecimento, esse corpus de conhecimento, como um ambiente, como um habitat para a inovação. E a gente tem que pensar em todas essas decisões que a gente toma, o que patenteia, o que licencia, se a licença é exclusiva, se a licença não é exclusiva, se a database vai estar publicada, se os resultados da minha pesquisa no laboratório que falharam, por que eu ponho embaixo da mesa? Por que eu não publico isso? Na verdade, até já existe um jornal hoje muito interessante, que é o The Journal of Failure Experiments, né, que foi lançado esse ano, inclusive. Então, na verdade, a gente tem que tomar decisões informadas, como as nossas decisões vão impactar nesse ambiente de conhecimento. E pensar que se a universidade não tomar algum posicionamento nessa administração do conhecimento, esse conhecimento já está explodindo de qualquer forma por lá, como o John apresentou, na parte da apresentação dele. Só um pouquinho, bem, eu acho que é isso, né? Eu só vou, eu vi que na verdade faltou um slide aqui, eu acho que eu devo ter mudado e deletado. Os exemplos que eu queria trazer no Brasil de inovação, como eu falei, são os freezers, são novas formas de encanamento que o pessoal aqui nas favelas estão utilizando. E na África é muito interessante observar que eles têm um problema de refrigeração muito grande e não existem eletrodomésticos em muitas partes da África, obviamente. Então, o que eles fizeram? Eles colocaram 2 vasos de barro, um dentro do outro, com areia no meio, e aquele é o sistema de refrigeração que é muito eficiente para eles hoje. Né? E também tem a questão do forno, etc, etc. Então, eu só queria trazer esses exemplos, já que o slide faltou, para completar aquela parte anterior da apresentação. Tá? Muito obrigada, aqui estão nossos contatos, estamos à disposição agora e a qualquer momento. Obrigada.
Muito obrigada. Agradeço ao João e a Caroline pela excelente apresentação e convido agora a mesa Ana Maria Pacon e Ana Castro será também debatedora. Tá bom, tá. Então, Ana, vou apresentar a Ana. Ana Maria Pacon, da Universidade Católica do Peru, que apresentará seu trabalho sobre grau de liberdade das oficinas de patente do caso peruano. Eu pediria a Ana Maria que se apresentasse.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Anna, for inviting me to participate in this seminar. And the topic of my presentation will be in contrast to the two others that preceded me, so very concrete, and we'll try to explore or to analyze the role or the freedom that the National Patent Office, in concrete the Peruvian National Patent Office, has under the new global standards. So I will make first some general considerations about I will do some general considerations about the situation of IP in Latin America in general and in Peru in especially, and then I will make or give some general information about the National Patent Office of Peru, and we'll explain some specific characteristic of the National Patent Office of Peru. And then I will try to explore which freedom has this, the Peruvian Patent Office under these new global standards, especially because of these new free trade agreements that were celebrated in the last years that enhance the IP standards from Peru. So in general, as you already know, in the last 15 years, there were, we can see enormous changes in the IP rights in general in Latin America. And if we review all the changes that were introduced in order to comply with the TRIPS standards, we can conclude that at least the Latin American country, and most of the Latin American country, didn't use all the flexibilities that TRIPS foresee. And if we try to analyze why they didn't use this all flexibilities, there are so different explanations. One of them is that perhaps the external pressure of, especially of developed countries, in order to introduce higher standards of protection. Another explanation is the lack of knowledge of the national legislators, and that has the consequence that didn't use this room of maneuver that TRIPS foresee. Another explanation, and that was, for example, in the case of the Andean countries, when they were negotiating a new Andean IP regime, they wanted, so far as possible, they wanted to copy, practice the text of the TRIPS dispositions. And that's in order to avoid any problems with for the WTO and also for other developed countries. And the last explanation is that and especially for 10 years ago, so many of the national legislators and negotiators believed that it was better for the country and for the investment and for the innovation and in order to improve the innovation of the country to introduce the highest standards of protection. And in some cases, that's why they didn't use these flexibilities. So that what we had is that all the Latin American countries changed their legislations and introduced, in general, very, very high standard of protection. After TRIPS, we all thought that now the harmonization of the IP standards will occur at this multilateral level, but we can see now that some years after the conclusion of the TRIPS agreements, especially developed countries started to negotiate at a bilateral, at a regional level in order to reach higher standards of protection. And what we have now is different free trade agreements where in most of them these FTAs or free trade agreements has a special chapter on IP. And in most of these FTAs, what we can see is that these IP dispositions are the standards of protection are higher than TRIPS. That's what we call these TRIPS plus dispositions. So that is more or less the context in which I will try to analyze which freedom or which role can a national patent office play in order to apply and the criteria that are in accordance to the needs of the national country. And I will do that in taking in consideration the Peruvian National Patent Office. So the National Office for the Defense of Competition and the Protection of Intellectual Property of Peru was created in 1992, and that time was the first institution with this kind of model in the region. What are the particularities of this national, not only patent office, because this is a national office for the defense of competition and for intellectual property issues? The first particularity is that all IP categories, not only industrial property categories, not only patent law, trademark law, design law, but also copyright and neighborhood rights are regulated and managed under the same office. Another particularity is that not only intellectual property issues are regulated in the office, but also competition issues. So that it is possible, at least in theory, that some abuses of IP rights can be limited through these competition authorities that are, as I said, under the same office. Another particularity is that in the COPI, that is the abbreviation of this national authority in Peru, in the COPI is not only competent for the granting of IP rights, but also for, it is also competent for the infringement of these rights. The only thing that in the copy hasn't competence is for the compensation of damages. For that case, you have to go to the ordinary judges. Another particularity is that there are, I mean, under the decision-making bodies from in the copy, we don't have only a staff, a public sector, but also participates in these decision-making bodies, also participates, so people from the private sector, from universities, from NGOs. The goal of this measure was to try to have some balance and to analyze all these IP and competition issues under different aspects, not only under an administrative public aspect, but also from the aspect from the interest of the private sector and of the universities. And in all these decision-making bodies, we have a mixture of all these different representatives, so that the goal is that they can control each other. And last particularity is regarding the organizational structure of, in the copy, we have the top a board that take the directional measures of the institution. Then we have these decision-making bodies that decide the granting or not granting of these IP rights, and also all these infringements proceedings. And we have a supportive body, it is the administration, that provide the administrative or that make possible that the decision-making bodies can do the work. At the top of the decision-making body, we have a tribunal for the defense of the competition and for the protection of intellectual property rights. And this tribunal have two chambers, or at the moment 3 chambers. It depends on how many cases are on these 2 big areas, IP and competition. And at the moment, we have 3 chambers, 1 for intellectual property issues and 2 for competition issues. These chambers are the appellate, they're at the appellate body for all the decisions that the different authority, the different office, for example, the patent office, the trademark office, and the copyright office took. So, as I said, I mean, at that moment, in more than 15 years ago, in the copy was a model in the region and was the first from this kind of institution. After the creation of in the copy, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, in Venezuela, so similar models were introduced. So especially, so institutions were under a same office, all the IP categories, industrial property and copyright issues were managed and were regulated. In concrete, regarding the patent office, the national authority for inventions and new technologies of in the copy, that is one of these. It is the first instance from this chamber for intellectual property issues in Peru. It is competent not only for patent issues, but also for utility models, for design laws, for plant variety protections and also for traditional knowledge. Peru, together with other developing countries, is asking at the international level for the recognition and for the enactment of an international regulation on traditional knowledge. And we introduced, so 5 years ago, especially law on the protection of traditional knowledge with some registers on traditional knowledge. And also all this area is under the control of this National Patent Authority of INCT-PPED. And since August 2008, there is a new organization of this patent authority. In the past, we only have, and that was the patent office that was competent for the granting of the rights, for the cancellation of the rights, and for the opposition of this right, and also for all the infringement cases, for the decision of all the infringement cases. Now, there are, under the Patents Office, there are two different bodies. One is the direction of the patent, for the patent authority, and the other one is a commission. The direction is competent for the granting of rights, only for the granting of the rights, of a patent right. If there is an opposition, or if there is an cancellation application, or if there is an infringement cases, that will be decided by the commission of the office. The difference between one and the other is that the direction is, only one person takes the decision to grant or not to grant or a patent. But in the case of the commission, there is a body. There are different persons, and here we can see, as in the past, also in all the competition issues, that we have this mixture of the public sector, private sector, NGOs, and university. So that is a new organization that is functioning since last year. As I said, and also the Patent Office of Peru, not only in the only the different authority from INCT-PPED, but also the Patent Office is competent for the granting of right, and also for the infringement of this right. It is provided under the Peruvian law that also that the third parties, they have the possibility to apply for or to question the patent application in a pre-grant opposition procedure, and it is also provide a post-grant opposition procedure. That is also, that it is possible under the Peruvian law to question the grant of a patent in two different opportunities. And that is, I think that is very positive, because that can reduce the cost of demanding the cancellation, for example, of a patent, and avoid the expense of the high lawyer expenses in order to obtain that for the national courts. It is also positive that there is provided a pre and a post-grant procedure, because it is also possible for the office to review and to modify and improve the decision that took regarding a certain application. Another special characteristic of this patent office is that the examiners of the office of the patent office are not only permanent staff of INCT. That means that there are some examiners that are external and that have signed. They are not staff of INCT, but they have celebrated a confidential agreement with the institution, and they can't analyze a patent application. That is a way that INCT found in the past in order to reduce the cost of the personal cost from the institution, and but on the other side, in order to reduce also the time to grant and to examine these patent applications. Another characteristic of this patent office is that, as I said, in the copy, it is possible. I mean, we have under the same institution the manage of the IP issues and the competition issues. That means that, for example, in an infringement case, it is also possible that all these IP, all these competition aspects of the case can also be taken in consideration, and it allows to grant a decision more complex and more, I mean, taking in consideration all different aspects, not only the technical aspect from the granting or denying of a patent, but also what are the consequences of this patent, for example, on the competition on a certain sector. It is also possible. The problem is that in the last 15 years, there are not a case in patent law that was decided, also taking in consideration all these competition issues. And that happened, I think, more because of the patent office and also the different competition bodies from INCT. They are very suspicious about the competence that they have, and they don't want to share in some way the authority that they have on one of these issues, so that they are very suspicious in order to take a decision that comprehends not only the technical aspect, the technical patent aspect of patent applications. I will mention some problems that I detect in a research that we are doing with Anna about the different patent office, or some different some patent office from Latin America. And in the case of Peru, there are three problems that I can identify. One of the problem is the lack of stability of the high authorities of the patent office, and not only for the patent office, also from all the other bodies from INCT. even if I said they are only not competent for granting the rights, but also for the infringement of the case and have quasi-jurisdictional functions. I mean, the patent office can take a censure, can close a company, can enact cautionary measures. And I mean, even if they have a lot of competence, they don't have a stability. So that it is possible, it is also possible, and that happens in the past, that the high authority from the different offices in the copies can be changed only if the board of the institution don't agree with the decision that it takes. That is one of the current problems. Another problem is the lack of competitive salaries that makes that there are a continuously change under the employees in the copy, and that is, I mean, that is a waste of resources, because in the copy it invests a lot in order to build this its staff. And after they have some experience, I mean, they are very attractive for the private sector. And another problem that I identify is that in the last years, especially in the last year, there are not so many capacity building programs, especially for examiners. So that is, I mean, that is the situation and the characteristic of the Peruvian Patent Office. And as I said, it was at the time of the creation of this new institution was a model in the region. It was copied by different countries, and it was and it still have a very well-known reputation. Now what I want to explore is what is the role that this office plays in all these negotiations procedures from the FTAs, and also what can do now the office under this new IP standard. I want only to say that Peru, as other developing countries in the last year, are concluded or are negotiating different free trade agreements, especially with developed countries. I mean, I will only mention the FTA celebrated and with the USA, with the EFTA countries, with Canada, with China, with Singapore, and at the moment the negotiations that are taking place with the European Commissions. So in most of these negotiations and in most of these agreements, we can find, as I said, we can find IP dispositions. These IP dispositions enhance the IP standards. What is the role that the Patent Office has in these negotiations? The competent authority for the negotiation of these FTAs is in Peru the Ministry of Foreign Commerce, and that is the case in most of the other countries. It's the Ministry of Foreign Commerce that is competent for the authorities. The patent offices only has a support role of and can only usually take part of the negotiation group, but I mean the decisions will do by the Ministry of Foreign Commerce. So, I mean, even if in the patent office doesn't agree with some dispositions and with the enhancement of some IP standards, at the end, I mean, it can do nothing if the Ministry of Foreign Commerce want to conclude and to celebrate some of these agreements. And that is the problem in the last, in all these negotiations that, and I can especially say about the Peruvian Ministry of Foreign Commerce, there is in very hurry in order to conclude all these FTAs. No? So that in most of the cases they accept the proposals of the developed countries, and we can see that after more than 50 years, all the introduction of all these new standards of protection, we can say that in general, I mean, the capacity of the negotiation and also from the national authority are much better. But even if we can conclude that they have more technical capacities about all these IP issues, I mean, at the end, or its bargaining power is very limited, and in many cases they only accept at the end the proposals that the other partner, I mean, and in most of occasions the developed country, the party submitted. So I will only mention in all these in the patent area, in all these areas, Peru and other countries introduce or accept in the frame of these new FTAs new standards of protection. And I will only, because I don't have so much time, I will only make some explanation what can, under these standards, the IP office do. For example, and regarding the invention, the definition of an invention. As you know, TRIPS doesn't contain any definition what is an invention. Only provides that all inventions that fulfills the three requirements of novelty, inventive steps, and industrial applicability must be patented. So that means that there are a room of maneuver of the patent office. So it is possible for the office and also for the different national countries that at the local level to regulate what it understands under an invention and to define what is the meaning of novelty, inventive step, and industrial applicability. No, that is. I mean, that makes possible for the different office and especially for the Peruvian Patent Office to introduce. I mean, to implement or to apply, to interpret very strict standards of protection or very wide standards of protection. And especially regarding novelty and inventive stuff, it is possible for our office to if they are very strict what is novelty, what is the definition of novelty, or what is the definition of or what is the definition of inventive stuff. I mean, if they apply that very strict, then like at the moment the patent office in Peru do regarding novelty, for example, they applied as other national patent office a very photographic novelty. That means that if the claim contain other ingredients than in the documents that establish the state of the art, they will be new for the patent office. No, that is not necessary to do in this way, and because if this is new, it is possible that can fulfill this other requirement of the inventive step. And the interpretation of this and the application of this difference requirement will depend on the grant or not of a lot of applications. No, also in the other, I don't have time in order to explain the different dispositions that were introduced in the last year and that enhance the IP standards, but also in this other about the second use, about the medical treatment, and it is possible, or there are still possible, some room of maneuver for the patent office and to interpret and to apply this in accordance to the need of the country. No? And this is accordance to TRIPS, because TRIPS doesn't contain in these areas so some standards. So, as I said, I don't have time to analyze all these different dispositions, and but I would like to conclude this is that I mean, the countries in general have limited bargaining power in the frame of these FTAs. They, I mean, most of them, and Peru is one of these countries that wants to celebrate a lot of free trade agreements in order to have more access to other markets. And one of the things that has to do is to enhance all these IP standards. But even under this new high level of protection, it is possible for a patent office to interpret these new standards in a narrow manner in order only to grant, for example, in the patent field, only to grant patent rights to inventions that are really new, that really implies a contribution to the technology standards of the countries. And it is also desirable that the National Patent Office that works more in connection with other public authorities from the country, for example, with the health authority of the countries in the past that they don't work together. They are now starting to participate, for example, the health ministry and also the regulations authority from Peru. They are starting to participate in the negotiations. I mean, but only to to provide from some support. At the end, as I said, I mean, it's the Ministry of Foreign Commerce that takes the decision. It is also necessary to have qualified examiners in order that they can use all these flexibilities. But the problem is here that in most cases, all this capacity building program is provided by the Patent Office of developed countries, and on this way, in some cases, are introducing or the conviction that it is desirable to grant more, to reduce the standard of protection and to grant more patents. It is also necessary that the patent examiners are more aware that they don't, when they grant or cancel a patent, that they are not only taking a technical measure, but also that this decision has consequences on health, on the health sector, on the agricultural sector. I mean, that is necessary that they are more aware of the consequences of their decisions. And also, it is necessary, for example, in the case of Peru, where it is possible that to take in consideration all the competition's consequences of the granting of this IP right in order to limit it or to limit the abuse of these rights. So that I wanted in my presentation to make give you some information about the Peruvian Patent Office and how the office can, and in the practice in some points, use the freedom that still has in order to limit the application of these higher standards of protection that now are valid in Peru. Okay, thank you very much.
Obrigada, Ana Maria. Vamos agora para o coffee break e voltamos rapidamente.